We are live, I believe. So, everyone, let me just see. We are recording. Yes, we're live. Wonderful. Welcome, everybody, to our healing conversations. And I've kept the best for last, I have to say. I'm here with my great buddy, Joe Dispenza. Now, I don't think there's anybody in the world who doesn't know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is, but if you're one of that tiny, tiny minority, he's an internationally best-selling author. He's an incredible international speaker. He speaks around the world, and he has focused his life on the interface between science and spirituality, science and neuroscience and spirituality, and spontaneous healing. And like me, he's seen a lot of these things. So, welcome, Dr. Joe. So great to be here with you.
I'm always happy to be with you, Lynn. Great to see you again.
Great. And by the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm Lynn McTaggart. I am an internationally best-selling author. I have 4 books in the field of science and spirituality, books like The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and my latest book, The Power of Eight. And I also run a weird thing called The Intention Experiment. I'll be talking to you a little bit about some of our latest experiments later. But Joe and I share a couple of things. Beside being fascinated by the same subjects, we are also both from New Jersey, both Italian. So you're going to get some real good straight talking here. So wonderful. So I thought our talk would be all about spontaneous healing, paving the way from healing, paving the way for healing. What makes people heal? And the reason I asked Joe is it's so fascinating to look, for instance, at the database from the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and I know you have in one of your books too, showing that people can have spontaneous healings of all sorts of things, even cancer. A certain percentage, a good percentage of people just reverse their cancer, doing nothing physical to it. People have spontaneous healings from diabetes, heart disease, all those kinds of things where they say the physical body is broken. So we're going to explore a little bit why this happens, but also what we've seen in the work we've done, because both of us do work where we see people with all kinds of diseases, all kinds of conditions, all kinds of issues spontaneously heal. So Joe, why don't you kick off a little bit? What do you see in your big courses? You see people who have had all kinds of things and something shifts in them. Why do you think that happens?
Gosh, it's a question that we probably could talk about for hours. And like you, I'm always interested in demystifying the process so that it's repeatable, that people have within their reach, some tools to begin to apply to their lives. So I think one of the things is that for the most part, people stay the same in their life. They're thinking the same thoughts, they're making the same choices, they're doing the same things, they're reliving the same experiences, and those experiences create the same feelings and the same emotions. And as long as that's the same, their biology is the same. So the fundamental question that I started to ask is if we could get people to retreat from their lives for 1 week and to remove the constant stimulation in their external environment that reminds them of who they think they are as a personality, as they separate themselves from all the different people and places and things in their life and give them the information and knowledge and combine a little quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics. If they begin to think differently, if they begin to make different choices, if they begin to do different things, if they begin to create new experiences that produce new feelings and new emotions, is that information relevant enough to begin to change their biology? And what we see is that people that actually do this over time, they begin to change their gene expression. They begin to change their immune regulation. They begin to change how their brain works, how their heart works. And they begin to cause all kinds of different metabolic changes taking place on a cellular level. And I think the most important part about it, Lynn, is that people need to know that this is the truth. And when people start to realize that it is the truth, then they begin to take their power back and say, yes, I may need a medication, I may need a supplement, I may need to do exercise. Those are all the things that we do in our lifestyle. But even if you do those things in your lifestyle and you're still the same, it's highly possible that your healing will take a longer amount of time. So that's one of the things. What about you? What do you see?
I see a similar kind of thing where and I guess for me, it's concentrating on thought processes. And what we look at, when you look at the IONS database, you see when you talk about cancer, people who overcome cancer, oftentimes you see that they've developed cancer because of what people call a trapped rat syndrome. They just don't believe life is going to get any better than it is for them. And they feel trapped in a bad marriage, in a bad job, or something like that. And that would suggest that what's giving them the cancer are their thoughts. So for us, also, it's about changing that thought process. And one of the fast tracks I've found, of course, is group intention. And one of the most powerful things I think that happens there is what the mystics call unio mystico, or the Course in Miracles calls the holy instant, what a lot of other people call a spiritual orgasm. Basically, it's somebody getting into a mystical state. And what we've seen is in the large group intention experiments and the small group intentions and my Power of 8 groups, what usually happens is people have 5 characteristics that happen. Number one, they have big physical changes. They feel different things. They're crying, they get goosebumps, something physical happens to them. Then they feel a sense of unity with the other participants. They step out of their own sense of separation and isolation. They see things more clearly. They see, the grass is greener, the flowers smell sweeter. Things, their senses are altered. They oftentimes have a big blinding epiphany of meaning, something like what the astronaut Edgar Mitchell had when he was coming back from the moon, and he had this amazing epiphany. And then they also have this sense of rejuvenation. So that suggests to me that something about diving into that state of unity, of oneness, is something in there is so supportive for change and for stepping out of themselves, as you say, that I think that is the trigger in my work.
Yeah, so it seems like there's the known self, the aspect of ourselves that we know, and then there's an aspect of ourselves called the unknown self. And that transcendental moment a lot of times is that moment where you have a perspective that's greater than the known self, and working somebody up into that state where they're no longer in separation is one of the most challenging things in the healing process, because unfortunately the diagnosis, the disease, the trauma, the news somehow causes the person to have a moment in time where they feel altered. In other words, when they get the diagnosis from the doctor, they have a moment where there's a change in their internal state. They feel fear, they feel sadness. That moment is altering their internal state. And the more altered they're inside of themselves, the more they pay attention to what's causing it outside of them. And the brain takes a snapshot, and that's a long-term memory. So that moment in time then, from the time they get their diagnosis, is a moment that begins to brand that moment neurologically in their brain and begins to send a strong chemical signal called an emotion to their body. And so then now they're in separation. They're going to wait for their healing to take place in order to feel joy, in order to feel gratitude, in order to feel reborn again, or in an altered state. And that kind of idealism of separation is waiting for something outside of ourselves to change in order for us to feel better inside of ourselves, to take away the emptiness, the separation, or the lack. And when we move into a transcendental state, something unique happens. we begin to feel the emotions of the event before it actually changes in our outer environment. In other words, the person who moves into that state of connection, that state of ecstasy, that state of insight, the moment they notice that change inside of them, without an experience outside of them, their body is so objective that it does not know the difference between the real life experience that would be creating that emotion and the emotion the person's experiencing by thought alone. So if the environment signals the gene, according to epigenetics, and it does, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, in a sense, that person is signaling the gene ahead of the environment, and genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of the body, and the expression of proteins is the expression of life. So the person in one moment, the amplitude of the emotion of connection or ecstasy or wholeness or bliss or whatever they're feeling tends to be greater than the betrayal or the diagnosis that created the fear in the first place. And that tends to reorganize the circuitry in the brain and sends a new chemical signal to the body. And sometimes it's profound enough that literally it begins to upregulate genes for the expression of health, and it begins to downregulate those genes that have to do with the disease that the person is facing. And the unique part about it is that it's happening in real time. In other words, the experience that the person is having in that moment is literally changing them. So that means then it's no longer their change is taking place in a lifestyle, which is matter to matter, avoid certain foods, do certain things, exercise a certain way, take these nutritional supplements. Those are the things that we do matter to matter. This instant is now somehow energy is beginning to influence matter. And it's not matter that's actually creating energy, it's energy that's creating matter. And that energetic field, that quantum field, if we change the signature in the field, we change the hologram in matter. And so there goes the tumor, there goes the Parkinson's, there goes the MS, there goes the rare genetic disorder, because the person had a moment in time that was greater than any past experience that kept them connected to the same emotional state. In other words, if the person's living by the same emotion of fear, they can think positively all they want. The thinking positively never actually makes it to the body because the body's feeling a different emotion. The mind and body are in opposition. But when the person moves into that elegant state where they're feeling the emotion of the future before it happens, the door is open in a matter of seconds for the body to literally be reprogrammed by a new mind. And now energy is instructing or informing matter in a certain way. And the instantaneous change then that's taking place is enough for the person to know without a doubt that there's been some change in their well-being. Now, getting to that point is something we could only talk around. You know, it's something that you have to overcome those unconscious thoughts that you were talking about. You have to break free of the programmed habituations and hardwired behaviors and really overcome the emotions that keep you connected to the past. Because if the emotions from past experiences are influencing your thoughts, and those thoughts are making the same chemicals for you to feel the same emotions, the redundancy of that cycle of thinking and feeling is the exact opposite. The body's believing it's in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So the body is believing it's in the same past experience, and that's the tendency for the body to be programmed genetically. So in one moment, when there's an elevated state, and that transcendental moment causes the person to have a glimpse of themselves, instead of being knocked to their lowest denominator where they can finally see themselves, pay attention to their thoughts, their behaviors and emotions, from an elevated state, a greater level of consciousness, they can look at their past and see it was perfect. Everything makes sense to them because it had to happen for them to get to this moment. And that's, I think, the moment that the past no longer exists.
That's really interesting. Yeah, whenever you look back with a rear view mirror, everything is perfect. Everything is where it was supposed to be to get you to this place. You said so many good things, Joe, and I'm going to just pick up some of the things you talked about. You talked about diagnoses, these toxic diagnoses, and I think that's one of the big issues. I actually do a course called Become a Better Healer Through the Power of Eight, and it's directed at practitioners because I keep records and notes of bad conversations with diagnoses. They're so terrible. I mean, I know of a case of a guy who had leukemia who was doing really well because he didn't know he had leukemia. And he was going into the hospital regularly and getting treatments. And all of a sudden, one day, when his doctor was out of the office, he read upside down that he had leukemia. The guy was dead the next day. Now, or the next week, I think it was. Now, nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. They couldn't find anything physically that had changed in him. That thought had killed him. And that had affected all of those processes you're talking about. So it starts oftentimes with the diagnosis, the sense of hopelessness. And as I say, I talk to and collect from practitioners the wrong ways to talk to patients, because whenever I've seen a doctor's always transmit hope, that is what I know of as a real healer. As my mother-in-law had, she had end-stage breast cancer, too late to get any conventional treatments. So we brought her to an integrative specialist who looked at her breast, which was essentially raw meat. And I was in the room with her when he was examining her for a little bit of moral support. And I heard him say, "Oh, I can handle that. We can handle that." And I thought, yes, she's healed right now. And she was. She lived for many, many more years with some very simple changes to her diet. But I think the hope and the support of the family is what upregulated all of that possibility you talk about. I also wanted to talk about just oneness, this idea of getting to that state. One thing that's been really fascinating for me is the power of intention in groups. And as you know, I run a year-long course called the Power of Eight Intention Masterclass, where I actually put people in groups and I monitor them for a whole year to see what changes in their lives. And what I have found is it's essentially a fast track to that field that you're talking about, that quantum field, because over and over people say, I suddenly felt this sense of oneness. And I think that is our potential state that you were talking about, this elevated transcendental state. And we don't get to feel that. That's our natural birthright. That's who we really are. We have this extraordinary capacity. You've seen it a million times, Joe. I've seen it a million times. People healing spontaneously. So it demonstrates we have this ability to heal. So we need to look for methods to get to that state. But the important information is to know that when we do step out of this sense of separation, when we have a glimpse of what the field is like, that can be, and so that we feel our actual being as part of something bigger, that can be hugely healing.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you 100%. And there is this elegant moment, in the research that we've done, Lynn, where when we're looking at, say, a brain scan in real time, we actually can predict and induce many times that state where a person literally gets beyond themselves. They get beyond their association to all the things that they identify with that's material and known in this three-dimensional reality. In other words, they forget that they are a physical body. They forget about the people in their life. They forget about the things and the objects that they own, the place they're sitting, the place they live, the place they work. They forget about time, trying to predict what's going to happen in the next moment or what happened in the past. In a sense, they dissociate from everything physical and material and become pure consciousness. And it is that moment that you can only talk around, where you finally surrender to trying to control and force an outcome. And that letting go process somehow is a moment of going from separation to a moment of connecting to a resource that we have available to us all the time. But the real question is, how much of our waking day do we put our attention on matter, on the physical world, and how much of our waking day do we put our attention on energy and information? And so teaching people how to get to that moment where they start connecting to that field, they'll have to understand a certain amount of science to be able to build the model. But the important point is they have to overcome some unconscious programming that you and I and all of us have fallen prey to. And that is that we are unconsciously conditioned into believing that our outer world, we need something from our outer world, an object, a thing, an experience, to change our inner world. And that means we're reliant on some exogenous substance or something outside of us. And so if we're reliant on something outside of us to change our internal state, by the same means, the more we react to any news in the environment, any condition in our outer world, our response to the environment can actually weaken the living organism. In other words, your frustration, your anger, your fear, your anxiety, your pain, your guilt, it's those reactions to events in our outer world that actually begin to weaken the living organism. So when a person all of a sudden is no longer responding to the conditions in their life the same way, I think that is the first step where the healing can begin to really sustain itself. Because you could have the most incredible meditation of your life and then get up and start reacting to your coworker, to your boss, to your ex, to your mother-in-law, whatever it is, to traffic, to the news, and you're back to that same personality that's connected to the same personal reality. And the environment now is constantly controlling the way a person feels and thinks. And if the environment is controlling a person's feelings and thoughts, then they are victim to their environment, and they're more prone then to anything in their environment to weaken them. So now they're more reliant on something in their environment to change their state. This is not that. This is where we reach the point where we say, the doctor told me I have 6 months to live. I'm in incredible pain. The medications aren't working. The chemotherapy is not working. The surgery didn't work. What am I left with? I'm left with myself and my belief in possibility. Now, unfortunately, this has been the path for many people where it is the wake-up call. It's the wake-up moment. And yet you and I have seen people who have made a decision in one moment, and I've interviewed enough people that have had spontaneous healings. I've always asked them, what was that defining moment? And they say, you know what? I realized that this stuff always made sense to me, but I had the unconscious belief that it worked for everybody else but me. I just didn't really, I never came up against that. And now they're stepping out of the bleachers and they're stepping on the playing field, because now it's the time for them to prove to themselves that it can actually work for them. This is a profound moment, because that person then makes a decision that they're going to change. And that decision is not wishy-washy. They make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision is carrying a level of energy that's causing their body to respond to their mind. That the choice that they're making in that moment becomes a moment in time that they would never forget. And the stronger the emotion they feel from that decision, the more they remember the choice that they make. And that's a huge explosion in the quantum field. That's a nodal point where now they're giving their body a sampling emotionally of the future. And they will say to you, I remember the moment I decided to change. I remember the moment I made up my mind to change. And from that point on, it was no longer labor. It was no longer work. Of course, it was challenging, but they wouldn't miss a day because they made that commitment to themselves. And so it may take them 6 months to overcome their unconscious thoughts, their automatic behaviors and habits, and their emotional responses. And then all of a sudden, from the outsider who's looking in, that person has a transcendental moment and they think, oh, that person's so special. They're so lucky they had that moment. But they weren't watching that person's change in behavior, change in thoughts, and change in emotions that led to that moment. And that elegant moment then, where they are transcendent of their personality, is the moment that that intelligence that we are connected to, whose signature is wholeness and oneness, whose signature is pure love, whatever, bliss, ecstasy, can move through us. And that's the moment that the body begins to heal. That's the moment that there's a change in our biology. There's a biological upgrade that takes place. And more people are beginning to experience that because it's the 4-minute mile. You witness the 4-minute mile, and then everybody jumps on. And that's the important point in history right now, that information is so readily available that when you see a person in your workshops or in my workshops stand on the stage with stage 4 cancer and tell their story from start to finish, and it's not a glamorous Hollywood version, and they lost everything, and they lost family, and they got worse, and then they got a worse diagnosis, but they never gave up. And they stand on the stage, and you're looking at truth. This is the example of truth right in front of you. And that person doesn't look young and buffed and a vegan. They don't look like they got it all. They just look at a normal person. And that's when everybody leans in and looks, because they want to know that that person is telling the truth, and they are, because their experience of what they did is helping somebody in the audience with a similar condition. And that's when all of a sudden the person says, if that person can do it, I can do it. And they step into that footprint. And the cool part about it is many times they do it, that change, in half the amount of time. Well, it's in the field. There's information, a footprint in the field, and there's evidence right in front of the person. And then that 4-minute mile becomes somebody else's opportunity to prove to themselves that it's actually possible. And so then, just like an infection spreads amongst a community and creates disease, and all of a sudden health and wellness become as infectious as diseases. And I think this is the time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And finally, people are latching on to that.
I think that's so right. And as you say, it's having that experience with other people, being with people, as you say, who have experienced what we would call a miracle. And then suddenly you recognize, actually, this isn't perhaps a miracle. Maybe this is something inherent inside me. Maybe this is a power to heal that I was given as my birthright. And that's some of the stuff that I look at, because the more I look at the extended human potential of the human being, the more I see extraordinary. All of the intention work I do, certainly a lot of the science, looking at things like, let's just take remote viewing, that Princeton University's studies of remote viewing, 2/3 of them had a person in the laboratory who was the remote viewer. Then they had a traveling partner who traveled somewhere, some random spot. And we'd only find out where he was going when he opened up an envelope. Well, the person got sent to anywhere from someplace around the corner to thousands of miles away. And the remote viewer would have to draw and describe where his partner was going before the partner received his envelope. So this was precognitive. It was all forecasting. And in 2/3, an extraordinary number of cases, using people who are just ordinary folks who weren't talented remote viewers, experienced remote viewers, they had incredible successes and just powerful drawings and descriptions. Now, in terms of healing, in terms of our capacity to heal, we knew this as a child. We knew we had extraordinary possibility, but it's been denigrated by our authority figures and also, of course, by our scientific story. But I've seen it, and I think you've seen it. And one thing that you said that was really important was people seeing someone else doing it. What I found in my work that is very powerful in Power 8 groups is altruism. Getting out of yourself, getting out of your own sad little story is kind of central to a group experience. You have to give more than you receive. And when people are stuck on, and they're not getting better, most of the time I'll just say, get off of yourself. Just focus on someone else for a moment and just see what happens. Now, one of the more extraordinary cases we had in one of the last talks, physical in-person talks I gave a year ago before COVID, et cetera, was in London, group of about 700-800 people. And I put people in groups, power of 8 groups, and had them send healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge, as I usually do. And I ask after that, okay, anybody got a story they want to talk about? And so lots of people stand up and say, well, I had a pain, it's gone. I have, I can bend more with my arthritic knee, et cetera, et cetera. So the last person, a whole group says, you got to talk to her, Maya. So Maya was sitting in the front there, and she was in a motorized wheelchair. She was paralyzed from the neck down. Now, she had some weird idiopathic paralysis, young woman in her late 20s. And this was tragic because she was a dancer. And doctors didn't know what had happened. It was no accident or falling or anything. So she's sitting there and I say, okay, Maya. And she gets up, she stands up. I've got it on video. The organizers videoed it. And I was just flabbergasted, as was the audience. And she stood up and she said, I'm standing. And she talked and she moved like a normal person. So I was so fascinated by this, I phoned her afterward and I interviewed her and basically said, okay, Maya, what was the moment? What happened? And she said, I felt more love from all of that group than I ever have in my life. In fact, it was too much for me. So I had to pass some of it on. So she passed it to a relative who had stage 4 cancer. And she said it was weird at that moment. She felt like her wheels were going through the floor of her wheelchair, her wheels of her wheelchair were going through the floor, and that suddenly she didn't need them anymore. It was really fascinating, but a real insight into what happens. And I see that with the folks in my Power of 8 groups, in the master class, because we're following them all year long. We had a woman who was deaf in one ear because of radiotherapy. And her group just kept doing intentions for her, focusing on a picture of a perfect ear. And she suddenly recognized that she could hear. We've had many more cases of cancer where the group effect seems to, the combo of the love, altruism, the getting off of yourself, focusing on someone else for a good part of the time, helps you ascend to that place you're talking about, Joe.
Yeah, I think altruism is an important element because one of the modus operandi that we use in our work is, in order to begin to affect reality, albeit your body or something external from you, you have to marry a clear intention with an elevated emotion. And that requires a coherent brain and a coherent heart. So we practice creating coherence in both of those organs. And many people will say in a whole week-long event, I'm struggling because I can't really open my heart. I can't really feel love. I can't really, and I always say to them, well, what do you practice feeling? Because whatever you practice feeling is what you get good at feeling. So there's a kind of a turnaround that has to take place for many people. But one of the fundamental moments for many people is when they have the opportunity to heal another person. Because the act of giving, you can't give without opening your heart. The giving releases nitric oxide. Nitric oxide releases a cascade of chemicals that causes the arteries in your heart to literally swell. So the act of giving is the act of opening our hearts. And as we start to open our hearts because we're giving, that's a selfless act where we have to take our attention off ourselves. And those people that have been trying the whole entire week to finally, to feel love, the moment they take their attention off themselves and put it on somebody else, and they realize it never was about them, it was about giving, that moment where they could actually get out of the way and give life to another person's life, to love another person in the life. That's that moment where they realize that's exactly how we have to open our hearts. So practicing the act of giving, and at the same time practicing opening our hearts, and doing it, going against all the survival chemicals of fear and aggression and pain that cause an arousal in the body to move out of balance. When all the conditions in your environment are saying to close your heart, that's natural and that's normal. We have to do something that's supernatural, and that is that we have to practice getting into that place where we can go against those survival chemicals and train our body to feel safe enough to move into that creative state. And once again, teaching people how to do that a lot of times requires them to get beyond themselves, that the survival chemicals and stress hormones cause us to become selfish. The act of giving is a selfless act, and it's that very act of giving and opening our hearts that actually begins to heal us. And I know that you've seen this numerous times. We see this so often that when people are healing another person, they're getting healed in the process themselves, because they're in such an elevated state that the body's actually experiencing the emotion of healing, and it's changing their biology. And we had a person that was on dialysis for years that was administrating a healing that came off her dialysis just by healing another person. I mean, so people need to know how deep this rabbit hole goes, because if you show up every day in the intention experiment groups and you want to be profoundly efficient at healing, and you're not doing it to create another identity, but you're doing it really to have a resource or a skill that you could use for people in your life, and not want anything from it except witnessing that person's story. Like we drop in on the healing groups that we have around the world, and I love to listen to the stories of a mother coming on and telling the story of how her daughter was unresponsive and couldn't make eye contact and had a birth defect, and after 3 or 4 healings, the child is engaging, can look at her siblings and begin to speak. It's not that matters the most. What matters the most is the emotion of the healers when they're sitting there and everybody has tears in their eyes because they knew on some level they changed the person's life. And we do it for that feeling. So every time we're successful, or every time we can change a person's life, and we celebrate the emotion of a mother whose child is responding to her other children, and we're all on the phone, all on the Zoom call crying, that emotion then will help you, I'm certain, the next time you heal, that you'll be able to get more into that feeling even more. And then when you feel that feeling all the time, and you feel so whole and so connected and so in love with life that you no longer want anything, you're no longer in separation, then the only thing you want to do is have people feel the way you feel. And the only thing you can do when you feel that way is to give. And as you give more, then here comes more of that energy, more of those emotions. And now the person is no longer doing it for any other reason, but because they want to feel more love. They want to feel more of that feeling, and then measure the effects that you can change another person's life. The game changes dramatically, I think.
No, you're absolutely right, Joe. And there's so much science that supports altruism. When I started seeing these kinds of healings in these Power of Eight groups, the journalist in me, the investigative reporter in me kept asking, well, why? What's the bottom line here? And I looked at altruism, and altruism truly is like a bulletproof vest. The more you do for other people, the healthier, happier, and longer living you are. I mean, they found even studies of people who lose their jobs, Americans who lose their jobs, who are in the lowest income bracket, don't suffer depression or illness as long as they have 2 things: a strong spirituality, a strong spiritual sense, and even more important, a strong spiritual community, a community that comes and helps. So it's connection as well as altruism that is really important. But you see people who are sick, who do things for other people with the same illness, they get better. They're more likely to get better. So there's extraordinary things like that. And in our Power of Eight groups, we find when the people are stuck, when they do something for someone else. I've seen this with Lisa, who was stuck trying to write a best-selling book. She was a bodywork practitioner, and she wanted to write a book on healing trauma. She had a really great practice that she was doing. She wanted to tell the world, never had written a book before, was getting nowhere, had gone through 3 editors, pulling her hair out. And her group, she was working with her group, getting nowhere. So I finally said, Lisa, get off of yourself. Intend for somebody who's got more of an issue, who needs help more. So she did. She intended for someone who had a really, a financial problem. And at the end of, I think at the end of that day, she had this uncontrollable urge to go into the shop she didn't even need to buy anything from. She goes in there, she bumps into someone she had been introduced to before, but what she didn't know was the woman who got talking to her was a book coach, an ex-publisher. And when she heard of Lisa's project, she offered to walk her through the whole process, including the marketing. Upshot is Lisa wrote an Amazon bestseller. And that happens over and over again, where I see as soon as people let go and start helping someone else, something in the universe or their feeling of worthiness, because they're actually helping with an open heart, not with an expectation of return, that seems to be the healer. Now, I see this a lot with not only the Power of Eight groups, because that in itself is a group. You got to send intention to 7 other people, and then it's your turn. So you have to be altruistic, but I see it in the big intention experiments I do. For the listeners that on your side, Joe, who don't know about what I do, since 2007, I've been running a thing called the intention experiment. I work with scientists around the world, and every so often I invite my readers or an actual audience, if I'm speaking somewhere, to send an intention to some well-controlled target. So I've done 36 of them to date. 32 has shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. The most recent ones I've been doing, though, have been looking at healing polarized communities. So this was not by design, this was by accident. I set up an intention experiment where I wanted to put polarized people as part of a Zoom call that would be broadcast out on Facebook and elsewhere on the 17th of January, right before the inauguration. It was to lower violence for the inauguration. Now, I did not know, I organized this before January 6th, so I didn't know there was going to be this massive storming on the Capitol. But what we did do in this group was I had some Republicans, I had some Democrats, I had an African American, several African Americans, I had a representative of the police, I had an ex-jihadi, I had somebody else who believed that everything about COVID was a vast conspiracy. We had a massive batch of different people, and they all came on and did it together. And we found that it was extraordinary. Afterward, the heart leapt across the fence. People were sending love to each other. These polarized people were starting to connect. And that had happened in a big intention experiment I did for Jerusalem a few years ago. We had Arabs and Israelis. And after doing the experiment, almost didn't matter what the target was. The act of coming together, essentially in secular prayer, helped the heart leap across the fence. And when you look at the science about that, and you look at what happens with the vagus nerve when you do something compassionate or altruistic, it turns on, and you know all about this, Joe, and it helps you connect more with people who are not like you. So one of the extraordinary things about, I think, group intention is also this ability to heal the heart and let the heart leap across the fence. And when I surveyed people who were part of this experiment a few weeks ago, I found that people were saying they were not worried about COVID anymore. They were less triggered when they talked to somebody who was of a different political party. there were all kinds of healings going on as well. People overcame migraines and this and that and the other. And it is, I think, that moment of coming together in a group, doing something, it's not just a good thing to do. It's the only thing to do. It's an essential thing to do for your own healing and for everybody else's.
I absolutely agree. Well said.
Joe, let's take some questions. I bet we've got people, well, I know we've got people who are asking questions. I can see it here. Let's get a question for you. Okay. Yeah, Joe, this is a good one. Can you give examples of changes people make to speed up healing? So what do they do what do you try to do in your workshops to give people that impetus?
Well, there seems to be two paths that I'm familiar with in terms of healing. If your personality creates your personal reality, and your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel, and you want to create a new personal reality, a new life, that means you're going to have to change your personality, which means you're going to have to make some changes about yourself. And that means you're going to have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change them. You're going to have to become conscious of your unconscious habits and behaviors, even how you speak, and modify them. And then, as I said earlier, look at the emotions that keep you anchored to the past and decide if those emotions belong in your future. And if 95% of who we are is programmed by the time we're 35 years old, then the majority of who we are is an unconscious set of behaviors, hardwired attitudes, and emotional reactions. So the first step to change is becoming so conscious of your unconscious self that you don't go unconscious in your waking day. And that's back to that idea of having a great meditation, and then getting up and returning back to your same self again. There won't be much change that will take place because you're back to the same biology. So now we have to prime the brain and body into a different state. So once you become conscious of who you no longer want to be, and the word meditation means to become familiar with, that's what it means, to become so familiar with those states of mind and body that you wouldn't go unconscious throughout your day. But to prime the brain and body then would be, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And with attention and intention, begin to install that hardware. And if you keep installing it, nerve cells that fire together wire together. Now that becomes the new voice in your head automatically. Then if you said, okay, how am I going to be with my boss? How am I going to be with my children? How am I going to be with my coworkers in this day? Let me think of a greater way to be. If you sat down and closed your eyes and you mentally rehearsed who you were going to be, there would come a moment, if you were truly present, that the brain would not know the difference between the real life experience and what you were imagining. And you could literally prime the brain by installing the hardware to look like you've already done it. Now the brain's no longer a record of the past, it's a map to the future. So then, if you can repeat that enough times, the firing and wiring takes the hardware and creates a software program, which means now you have circuitry in place to automatically behave that way. If you keep doing that, that becomes familiar to you. Then you say, okay, how would I feel if I accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish in this day, that I demonstrated greatness, that I stayed conscious the entire day? What would be the emotion that I would want to teach my body to feel before it's happened? So then you got to trade pain, suffering, guilt, unworthiness for this elevated emotion, and you would want your body to become familiar with a new chemical state. The act of doing this enough times begins to change the brain circuitry, change the brain chemistry, change the hormonal secretions, and change our gene expression, so that in time, the person literally becomes someone else. So they overcome the old self to become a new self. That's the one way. The other way is that transcendental moment where the person finally reaches the point where they're so engaged in their internal process that they dissociate from their body, they dissociate from all the elements in their environment, and they dissociate from linear time. And that is the moment the door to the quantum field opens up. And if they're able to run into it or have an interaction with it, we tend to see that the change is more spontaneous and more in real time. In other words, the transcendental moment where they connect to that signature of wholeness is being displayed biologically in their body in a matter of seconds. And sometimes it's a combination of both, but really it's just giving people numerous opportunities to overcome themselves, numerous opportunities to connect, and taking knowledge and information and applying it and personalizing and demonstrating it until they have the experience or experience the truth and begin to embody it. And if they keep doing it enough times, they become that knowledge. And that's going from philosopher to initiate to mastering something about ourselves. So we see it kind of in both ways.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. So Claudia has said, I'm 51 and I have severe scoliosis. Is it possible to heal even bones? Why don't I take that one? We just had a guy, Raymond, in our master class this year who had terrible bone cancer, which was constantly breaking his bones. So much so the doctors thought they had to amputate both legs. So his group continued to do intention, and they kept working on Raymond, kept working on him until he had to have his operation. And when the doctors went in, they had said the cancer was disseminated. They found a coalesced cancer that was in just coalesced to one simple tumor. And his bones were healed so much so that they didn't have to amputate. So I've seen this many, many times. I've seen people healed extraordinarily. There was a young boy called Luke who his stepfather wrote to me because he tried to commit suicide when he was 15 after breaking up with his first serious girlfriend. And he jumped off of a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. Now, Luke broke every bone in his body. And the doctors didn't think he was even going to live. But we did a healing, essentially a healing vigil for him over 3 successive Sundays, while his stepfather kept a running commentary of exactly what was going on with Luke and demonstrated that Luke had huge responses every time we did intention. And at the end of about 3-4 weeks, Luke got out of the hospital in record time. I saw his parents last autumn at a talk I gave, and they showed me a picture of him as a normal, healthy 18-year-old boy. So I've seen it numerous times. Anything can heal with your mind. Anything. I'm sure Joe knows that too. Anything can heal with your mind when you get to a different and elevated mind state. So we see it in the group effect. And what's going on there? You know, it's the group, it's intention, it's the person's desire to change, it's altruism, and it is also love, you know, simply love. People report over and over again, and particularly now since we've been in lockdown, a good part of this past year, people talk about these groups being their intention family, you know, where they are closer to these people. These are perfect strangers they start out with who have your back and are intending for you over and over and over again. Never doubt the power of that kind of unconditional love to be an extraordinary healer. Think of Maya. These were total strangers. They sent this extraordinary love to her, so much so she felt she didn't even need it all. So I think there's that element too, and anything can be healed. So let's take something else for you. Here's a great question for you, Joe. People want to know someone wants to know about brain waves. Where in the brain scan do you look to see where a person goes beyond themselves? Are we talking fMRI, QEEG? If so, what frequency, optic measures, where, frontal lobes? What's your experience, Joe? Because here we have, there are different paths to Rome. We have 2 different things that we do brainwave wise. But let's hear yours first, please.
I don't want to get too technical for this broadcast, but I will say that one of the things that we work on as a community is entering the operating system where true change can take place. And that means then a person has to learn how to self-regulate and change their brainwaves. And we've kind of spent so many years in studying how this phenomena takes place. And when we begin to move from our conscious mind to our subconscious mind, one of the things we have to move past is our analytical mind. And our analytical mind is that critical part of our mind that really weighs what we know against what we don't know. That's the simple way to say it. So when you're learning, when you're executing in your life, when you're navigating ethically, it's important to have an analytical mind. But when we tend to be a little bit aroused from stress, we become overly analytical, and the brain moves into these higher brainwave states called high beta brainwave patterns. And that causes us to become over-focused. When we're stressed, we get over-focused on things. We loop. And so in stress, we narrow our focus on everything in our environment that's causing us to feel this way, because you can't take your attention off the threat or the danger. So when we started looking to see how we can teach people how to change their brainwaves, we thought maybe we should do the opposite. Instead of them focusing on something material and narrowing their focus on something physical, to broaden their focus and put their attention on nothing, on space, on energy. And the act of sensing caused their brainwaves to begin to slow down from beta brainwaves to alpha brainwaves. But not just any kind of alpha brainwaves. We started to see that the disintegration that was taking place in the brain because of the hormones of stress, the brain started to systematically become organized. We started to see more coherence and order in the brain. We started seeing different compartments of the brain that were once subdivided start to unify into greater and greater communities. And what syncs in the brain links in the brain. So we saw this global sense of coherence taking place in the brain. And of course, in the beginning, there's an activation in the forebrain and the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe lowers the volume to the circuitry in the brain. And then all of a sudden, a person moves into this state of theta brainwave patterns. Now in theta, it's a very hypnotic state, and the person is very suggestible to information. And suggestibility is your ability to accept, to believe, and to surrender to information without analyzing it. And now the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is wide open, that you can rewrite a program. You can lay down new information. Now, that's what a hypnotist does when they program somebody to do something. But what if the person's eyes are closed, there's music playing in the background, they're sitting still, they're not eating, they're not smelling, they're not tasting, they're not getting up with their body, feeling and experiencing? Could they tune into information that is not in three-dimensional reality through their senses? And when people start to tune in to energy and information, not with their senses, but with their awareness, if there's resonance, coherence between the nervous system and the brain and the heart, this kind of entrainment takes place, and all of a sudden the person goes into this very aroused state of very, 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 very high gamma brainwave patterns. Now, not a little gamma, not a lot of gamma, not a whole lot of gamma. We're talking about a supernatural amount of gamma. The person's entire brain is aroused and super coherent, and that person is having that transcendental moment where they feel connected to something greater, when their senses are heightened, that what's going on between their ears is more real than anything they've ever experienced in their life. They're touching that field of information of the unknown self. And the more coherent the brain, the more orderly the signal, and the brain transduces that information into profound imagery. That kind of gamma that's taking place in that person's brain, the arousal that's created isn't created from fear or anxiety. It's not created from anger or aggression, and it's not created from pain or suffering. The arousal is ecstasy. The arousal is bliss. And the orderliness that's taking place lights are out in the thinking neocortex, and that autonomic nervous system, the seat of what's controlling and coordinating all other systems in the body, is getting a very resonant, coherent signature. And that autonomic nervous system is controlling and coordinating all other systems. And all of a sudden, all the cells of the body are being touched with a greater frequency. And they start to jiggle, or they start getting information that causes the cells to emit more coherent light and information. And the person says, I was so connected, I felt it in every cell of my body. As you said, it's physical, but at the same time, it's not. The arousal is creating a moment in time where they feel like they're connected to something greater. And you only need one of those moments where you cannot return back to being the same person again because you know too much. So when we see these moments where we see this kind of breaking of patterns and we see these kind of downloads taking place, as soon as we see that, or we see the frequency in the strip chart starting to go up, I can say to a neuroscientist who's sitting right next to me, oh, Lena's going to pop here in a second. Oh, what do you mean? Just watch. This is going to get good. What do you mean? And there's so much energy in the brain that many neuroscientists are concerned that the person's having a seizure, except they're completely still. They have this huge smile on their face, and certainly something amazing happening. And it's not just in one region, it's global. And that kind of orderliness that's taking place, that connection that they're feeling, is such a level of integration that the heart is going into coherence at the same time. And there's a sympathetic response that takes place. And that sympathetic response is an arousal. And it's like a full, as you said, like a full body brain orgasm. The person's dipping into the divine. They're touching source. They're connecting to pure love. And I think that the cool thing about it is that it happens in all races, all diets, all sexual preferences, all social castes, all cultures. It happens young people, old people, sick people, health people, that nobody is so special to be excluded from the phenomenon. So that's a short story of it.
No, and thanks so much. That is brilliant. And what's also interesting is I've seen a couple of people who have had near-death experiences, who have come back and had healing ability, and they have been recorded as having a high gamma state. So that is really fascinating, as have Buddhist monks, etc. So that is really brilliant, and that is an extraordinary route to healing. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what our experience is with our Power of Eight groups. So there's a very different brainwave signature, but this is just a different road to Rome. But because both have extraordinary, as I say, healing powers that we've witnessed. Now with ours, it's really fascinating. We've done work with neuroscientists where we've taken novices, people who hadn't even meditated, and we put them into Power of Eight groups, and we put EEG caps on them, QEEG caps, as our questioner asked. And what we found was a global lowering of brain activity, but particularly in the parts of the brain that make you feel separate, essentially, like the parietal lobes sit right here, and they tell us what's me and what's not me. They help us navigate through space. They were dialed way down, as were the temporal lobes, as were the portions of the brain, the frontal lobes. Ours were also turned way down, particularly the right frontal lobe, the parts of the brain involved with worry, doubt, negativity. So these were brainwave signatures. We thought they were going to look like meditation, and it looked nothing like meditation. It looked like the brainwave signatures that have been recorded with Carmelite nuns when they're in ecstatic prayer, Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer, Sufi masters during chanting, work done by Dr. Andrew Newberg. It was almost identical brainwave signatures. So these were people who were experiencing a state of ecstatic oneness. So it was that getting, like Joe, it's that getting out of the self, the ordinary, corporeal, separated self that we have, that seems to be an extraordinary fast track to healing. So let me find another question for you, Joe. Let's see what we've got. We've got, Ah, okay, this is a very cool question. How do you get rid of the fear after the diagnosis? Can you give any suggestions?
I think this is one of the most difficult things for many people, that moment in time where the doctor gives the diagnosis and the moment the person feels the fear, they're very suggestible to information that is equal to that emotion. So if the person gets a diagnosis, you have stage 4 cancer or you have serious ALS that's going to progress, then anything that the doctor says past that point begins to program the autonomic nervous system into a destiny. In other words, you have 6 months to live. People with this condition have the following things that happen to them. And because the person's feeling fear, they'll accept, believe, and surrender to that information equal to their emotional state. And that begins to program the autonomic nervous system literally to that destiny. And as you said, people can literally program themselves to die by thought alone the moment they associate their condition with some symptom. So then we've studied this enough times to know that that fear then is putting them in a state of emergency or state of survival. And it's literally weakening the body's immune system. It's literally downregulating genes. It's literally endorsing or accelerating the health condition because there's no energy to heal. There's no energy in the person's internal environment for growth and repair if they're mobilizing all of this energy for some threat in their outer world. And so then the first thing is that the person has to understand intellectually, theoretically, analytically, that there's a difference between living in a state of survival and living in a state of creation, and that they have to work on learning how to lower the volume to the emotion of fear by catching the thoughts that begin to create those feelings. And when they feel those feelings, break the pattern that feeling begins to activate more or influence more of the same thoughts. And it's this cycle of breaking the pattern of thinking and feeling that creates this kind of feeling of enormous discomfort. In other words, the moment you decide to make a change, get ready, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And the discomfort that we feel from not feeling fear sometimes is greater than the feeling of fear itself, because at least if we feel fear, we can at least feel something familiar or known. But when we're out in the unknown and we're no longer feeling fear, many people rush back, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And they start forecasting the worst case scenarios in their minds. So when we combine that vision of the future, like that what's going to happen with me, to me, with the emotion of fear, we're literally conditioning the body emotionally to become the mind of fear. And in time, the body becomes programmed to such a degree that we could have a panic attack. Try as you may to control it with your conscious mind, we program it subconsciously. So then teaching people how to surrender into the present moment is one of the most important things that we've studied. When a person is sitting there and their body wants to lay down or wants to get up and quit, or they start feeling fear and they're going back to the past, instead of quitting and giving up on themselves, this is the time where they have to catch the thought of that worst case scenario and return back to the present moment. When the body gets vigilant and impatient and starts feeling anxiety and fear, that's the moment, instead of quitting, to settle the body back down into the present moment. And if you think of the body as the animal, as the servant, and you are training the animal, when it tries to run to the worst case scenario in the future, and you catch it and you bring it back to the present moment, that's a victory. It's not time to quit. That's actually a victory for you. When you notice, you remember what the doctor told you and the diagnosis and the emotion that goes along with it, and you go to the past and you catch yourself doing that and you return back to the present moment, you're executing a will that's greater than the program, or better yet, you're telling the body it's no longer the mind, that you're the mind. And if you're doing this consistently over and over again, there comes a moment, just like training an animal, where the body finally surrenders into the present moment. And it's tedious in the beginning because our mind is so untrained, but if we stick with it and we keep remembering that every time we catch ourselves and when we're going unconscious and we become conscious and we keep returning back to the present moment, there comes a moment where the body acquiesces. And when that happens, there's a liberation of energy. Information and energy is being released from the body. We're going from particle to wave, from matter to energy. And energy naturally starts to move into our heart. And in a sense, we're transmuting pain and guilt and unworthiness into love. And the act of doing that begins to cause us to transmute fear, as an example, into a state of gratitude. Now, why is that important? Because I have talked to enough people that have healed from health conditions where they've always said the same thing. I just reached the point in my life where I was so happy with who I am, so grateful to be alive, I could care less if I had the disease. That is the moment their healing occurred, because the emotional signature of gratitude, when you're receiving something favorable, when you've just received something favorable, when something is happening to you that's favorable, or something that just happened to you is favorable, you feel this sense of gratitude. So the emotional signature of gratitude means it's already happened or something wonderful is happening to you. So the body's so objective in a state of gratitude that it puts us in a state of receiving. So when we begin to feel gratitude and we trade fear for gratitude, we will accept, believe, and surrender to thoughts equal to that emotional state, and we can begin to program the autonomic nervous system into a different destiny. And overcoming fear is something that requires a tremendous amount of energy and a tremendous amount of awareness, because your brain keeps going to that moment in time where you remember the diagnosis and everything the doctor said afterwards. And people who have healed so many times just gave up, and they said, I'm not going to accept, I'm not going to believe, and I'm not going to surrender to that diagnosis without analyzing it. And I'm going to begin to change my thoughts, change my actions, change how I speak, change how I feel. So if we're in a state of gratitude, then we're suggestible to emotions and thoughts that are equal to that state. And that's how we begin the reprogramming process.
And I think absolutely, Joe, and gratitude is such an important element. You know, people look at what's wrong with their lives and they don't look at what's right with their lives. They don't think about just small steps, baby steps, and baby steps of gratitude can end up creating giant steps of healing. Now, someone asked a couple of questions I'll answer. One is, do the effects stick after you're no longer in a group? Well, I can only report to you the thousands of people that I've worked with who are permanently healed after being part of a Power of Eight group. The group is a vehicle for your own healing. The group and all of those things, there is intention, there is the group effect, there's altruism, there's also an X factor there. You know, when we talk to people who have done Power of Eight groups, they describe things like this, and this is oftentimes people who have had one healing with a Power of Eight group. They'll say, there was a woman who had terrible arthritis in her knee, so badly, her knee was wobbling. She could barely stand on it. And after 10 minutes of a Power of Eight group, she did a giant squat. And I asked her afterward, well, Sandy, what happened when that whole experience was going on? And she said, I felt like there were warm mitts holding my knee. Now, that had nothing to do with the group. The group were holding hands in a circle, but there was another something. Other people have reported, there was another woman who said, I felt like there were light beings behind us, and like they were the magnifiers. Now, I don't know. I certainly haven't demonstrated that scientifically, but I get more and more conversations like that with people who have taken work in Power of Eight groups. Now, that can be being in that extraordinary, elevated, transcendent state where they imagine this. Or it can be something real. They actually are with guides, light beings, et cetera, et cetera. That's the X factor. But yes, we see it, I see thousands of cases like this. Cases like Mitchell Dean, who had crippling, nearly suicidal depression. And this was a bad look for him because he's a clinical psychologist. And after working with his group for a year, he not only overcame his chronic depression, found out the source of it and corrected it through the intentions of his group, but he lost 15 pounds. He overcame writer's block. He learned to meditate. He was able to put out into the world a new technique he had for healing people in psychology, people with various issues. And so his life was healed. And I just heard from him a couple of weeks ago, and he's still great. So yeah, it does last. And the other question this person asked was, what about if somebody else doesn't believe? Well, the story I told you about Luke is a perfect one. The young boy who tried to commit suicide. Remember, he was 15. And like most adolescents, and particularly in this case with his parents believing in the power of intention, he thought they were pretty stupid. And the whole idea of intention was pretty stupid. So there's a case where it couldn't have been a placebo effect because he didn't believe in it whatsoever. So we see many, many cases like that. Joe, it seems like we could probably go on forever, I think. But any last words you want to say?
Oh gosh, I'm just so happy that people are open to these concepts and ideas. I know that God, we met more than 20 years ago, and back then there was just not a whole lot of credence or acceptance to some of these concepts and ideas, and I think God, it's just such a privilege to be doing this with people like you and that have been empirical and persistent in their beliefs and measuring some of the outcomes and the fact that people are interested and the fact that people are doing it and the fact that it's becoming a new way, a new consciousness. I'm just super grateful. So thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you so much, Joe. And your contribution has been just extraordinary. As he says, we met nearly 20 years ago. We were both dipping our toe in the water, and look what's happened since. So I want to tell you everybody about, Joe has an upcoming course called The Formula, and that's going to be out sometime in late February. So people should come onto your website, which is?
Yeah, my website is drjoedispenza.com. And we haven't picked the launch date just because we have too many moving parts. But the formula really, in a very simple one sentence clauses, it's just a good introductory level course for people to understand what it is what we've discovered in all the research that we've done to help people to begin to make measurable changes in their body and in their life. And we've whittled it down to a simple formula. And if people want to heal, we found that it's important for them to learn the formula that will help them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe. And for me, I have a Power of 8 masterclass that starts my year-long signature course. It starts on February 6th. So if you're interested, there are a few places left, not many. So have a look on my website, lynnmctaggart.com, and it'll be in all of the chat on this discussion. And also for people who just want to set up a Power of 8 group, you get lots of instruction from me. You get year-long tips, advice, etc. We put you in a group. And we monitor your progress, we help you out, and we help to heal you. For people who just want to set up their own Power of 8 group, we also do that on my website, on my new community site. You can just advertise for it. And for a couple of the Germans who said, where do I set up a Power of 8 group? I saw that in the chat. Well, the great news is I'm going to be doing an Intention Essentials course in German in mid-March. So check out everything on my website and we'll let you know about all of that. Dr. Joe, we always have so much fun together. Everybody, we're both from New Jersey. We love to tease each other about that. He's Jersey boy, I'm Jersey girl. And we both talk about how our grandmothers made fantastic pasta and meatballs. So it's fun for us always to connect wherever we are in the world. So hopefully, Joe, sometime we'll be traveling soon and we will bump into each other once again.
Yeah, let's intend that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody. Thank
Hey.
you for joining us. Take care now.